Well, thank you so much, Dr. Johannesson. Iceland is a very interesting case study in terms of energy mixes and prospects of higher carbon developments and renewable energy. And our next speaker is from Norway, and Mr. Mr. Nils Andreas Masvie is Vice President of Det Norske Veritas and GL company. He holds a Master of Arts degree in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston, United States. He has been with the DNV company since 1993 and has been working with oil and gas risk management for more than 20 years. His projects include South Stream Black Sea gas pipeline, Nord Stream Baltic Sea gas pipeline, Blue Stream Black Sea gas pipeline, Stockman project, Kashagan Caspian oil field project, and Barents 2020 project, and so is the Circumpolar Knowledge Sharing project. Mr. Masvie previously also worked with the World Bank's International Finance Corporation in Ukraine, the Norwegian independent oil company Saga Petroleum, and the Norwegian Foreign Mission to Moscow. And his topic today is about the Barents 2020 project, which is an important result of Norway and Russian cooperation. And he's also going to talk about risk management of Arctic resource development. Mr. Masvie, the floor is yours.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any excellencies left, absolutely, excellencies as well. Thank you for this kind introduction. I'm going to share with you some thoughts and some lessons we have had about jointly working with this. And let me just say that I congratulate Iceland with their it was encouraging and inspiring to listen to the plans you have ahead, and it's not all Norwegians that think it was prudent to make a moratorium on this field. So don't worry, there will be friends in Norway who will work together with you on this. I will now draw our attention to one project that started as or is a standards project. And you can ask, why on earth do we talk about standards when we have distinguished lawyers, ambassadors, and we're talking about the big, big picture? Actually, there is a link between the standards, and it's up to the laws and regulations. And how laws and regulations function very much impact how can you mobilize technologies. And so let me first take you through a big industry effort where the industry took upon themselves to look into how we can solve some of those challenges we have in the Arctic. And after that, I will reflect a little bit about how it currently looks with the regulatory legal systems in the Arctic states to see how we are doing on that. Okay. By the way, the reports from this project I'm going to refer to, they are all downloadable on the internet. We started back in 2007, and it started as a Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs funded initiative to look into the Barents Sea. The Barents Sea is a common shared sea in the north where Norway and Russia has a common border. When we started this project in 2007, we still had a disputed so-called gray zone where there was a government dispute between Norway and Russia. But during the course of this project, the coincidence in timing, of course, pure coincidence. Nevertheless, during the course of this project, an agreement was reached between Norway and Russia to make a delineation and to actually make a new agreed border in the middle of that previous gray zone, which means that the Barents Sea is more actual than ever, is more interesting than ever, And it is a prolific area where we saw that the technologies needs to be developed. We need to cooperate. Since challenges and pollution don't know borders, we also realized that let's work with our neighbors to see how we can bring the industry up to a common safety standard. This started with seed funding and as an initiative from the Norwegian Foreign Ministry, but our financial partners and our actual participants with contributions in kind, in addition to financially, you can see here, Gazprom and Statoil, but soon this also developed into a broad international cooperation where both Eni and Total joined, as well as OGP, the Oil and Gas Producers Association. You also see the Stockman Consortium and Rosneft taking part in this from the sponsoring side. In addition to these partners, there were 40 organizations from Russia, from Norway, and from abroad who worked in the 7 different working groups, which means that this was a major industry effort to look into the issues we had in front of us. The starting basic premise was that both Norwegian industry and Russian industry will have some new challenges when we move into cold climate, harsh environment, weak infrastructure, cold climate projects in the north. Our premise was that in Norway we have good experience from challenging offshore projects, but with more traditional climate challenges, i.e. not cold climate. And we also had the assumption that in Russia there is a deep industrial cold climate experience, but mainly from onshore. And we thought that if we could bring the Russian operational cold climate experience together with the offshore experience from the North Sea, we could basically sit together and try to find the new solutions for cold climate, yes, and offshore developments. What is a safety level in the Barents Sea? It's a philosophical question. It's very, very difficult to get an understanding. So in this project, we looked back into the statistics from the North Sea, where you have safety statistics from the 70s. And we agree that let's look at the safety statistics from the offshore play in the North Sea and assume that or take as a premise that the Barents Sea operations shall be no less safe than the safety level we already have established in the North Sea. So it should be as safe or safer. And when we looked to the left column here into the risk contribution from the different activities in the North Sea, we saw that when you take an operation from the North Sea, the left represent actual data. When you take that operation into an ice-free Barents Sea operation, the risk increases. When you further take it to a sea ice Barents Sea operation, the risk increases even more. Some operations immediately increase in risk when you go to an ice-free Barents Sea, but some other only get more damaging when you move into an ice sea or sea ice condition. So we realized that if you continue to do things exactly the way you do in the North Sea and you move those operations to the Arctic, you will have a higher risk. Why will you have a higher risk? Not because accidents happen more frequently, but because accidents and incidents, when they happen, would be more devastating. So even if you assume that you don't have more frequent failures, you don't have more frequent accidents, an operation that is moved into the Arctic becomes more risky, more dangerous by the mere fact that the mitigation and the accidents would be much more devastating. Search and rescue, just to take one example, is much more challenging in when you have light and when you have a milder temperature, you have a longer time window where you can do search and rescue. If you have a really, really cold environment and darkness, you have very, very little time to find lost people. So if you lose people at sea, it is a very, very different risk in those two cases, because you don't survive a long time in a cold environment. You survive a little bit longer in a warmer environment. So if a harsh North Sea operation is brought into the Arctic, you have a higher risk. How can you bring the risk down to the same level? And in the project, we agreed we cannot turn on the light in the Arctic in the winter. We cannot turn up the heat in the Arctic in the winter. It's not a lot of things we can do on the consequence side. So we cannot really move the consequence picture from accidents back. But what we can do is we can drive the likelihood of accidents taking place downwards. In other words, if you see this is a simple risk matrix where risk is defined as the product, the multiplication of a likelihood of something happening and the consequence if something happens. So when the likelihood is the same, but the consequence is worse, what can you do to bring the safety level down to the same? It is by actually reducing the likelihood of an accident. That's why we focused on standards and technology, so that we have standards and technologies that brings down the likelihood of an accident to virtually zero. There is no such thing as zero risk, but we can bring it as far down as we can to make this again something that is acceptable. And here we get a little bit back to the relationship between the lawyers and the engineers, because we are working in these yellow, orange floors of the pyramid, where we talk about functional standards and more detailed industry standards. The industry standards today are a global body of vibrantly developing standards: ISO, GOST, API, BS, EN, DNV, what have you. You have a lot of standards. Some of them are more functional in character, and some of them are more prescriptive or detailed. Above this, we have the parts of the pyramid that is part of the national remit. So while the standards would be international, available, free for everybody to use, typically written in the English language, the blue floors here would belong solidly to the national domain, written in the national language and approved with the national legislature. So we worked in these yellow, orange fields, not roughing the feathers with the politicians, not messing up with the regulators, but trying to make the standards in this body here as good as possible. We asked industry to challenge us in this project about what are the main areas where we should focus our efforts in order to do study and work on the standards. We don't argue that these are the only or even the most important areas, but we argue that these are the most important areas for us, which are not already taken care of by other research initiatives and handled in other ways. So we had 7 working groups, and you see at the bottom of this slide the logo of Gazprom Vnigas, because this project was run by DNV as international project manager, and Gazprom's research unit Vnigas as the Russian project manager. So this was a jointly managed project. We had one group number 2, working on how to do correct ice load calculations on floating structures. We had group number 4, working on escape, evacuation, and rescue. And mind you, this is not a best practice image, because we don't want to have free-falling lifeboat on on solid ice, so this is just for illustration. Group number 5 worked on what should be the working environment for people working in cold climate. Group number 6, what are the best practices we have today in the world on ice management? Group number 7, what should be operational and mission and discharges rules for Barents Sea operations? And then we had 2 facilitation groups. Group number 3, working with how to do risk management in Arctic conditions. And we just happened to have the project manager and the coordinator for this group. He participates at this conference, Børre Påske, and he will have a seminar during the parallel sessions at 3 o'clock. So he's actually here at this conference. And one of the group then worked to feed, group number 1, to feed the results of this work into the standards body. And some of you are familiar with the ISO 9906, which is the ISO Arctic standard. Through the history of this project, the ISO 9906 became a more pure design standard, and this group have now delivered their recommended practice for how to do calculations on floating structures under that standard. And then the work with search, evacuation, and rescue group number 4, working environment group number 5, and ice management group number 6 formed the basis and input into a newly formed subcommittee 8 under TC67 in the ISO system. This is chaired and managed by, this has Russian chairmanship, and there are certain subcommittee chairs. Some of them are Canadian, some of them are Norwegians, some of them are Russians, and I'm sure there are also some other nationalities in those subcommittees. So as you can see, this project did not want to monopolize or to create a new body on this area. We fed all the results straight back to the correct owners and to the correct writer of these standards. So when we finished this, approving in the project 130 standards that we agree can be used in Norway and Russia, some of them can be used as they are, approximately half. The other half needed to be amended. We were asked by the sponsors and also by the Foreign Ministry to share the lessons from this Barents 2020 project to the regulators and the industries in Norway, Russia, Canada, United States, and on Greenland. The status there is that we completed those sharing lessons in Norway and Russia last year. We are still negotiating how to do this in the US, and the plan is to roll this out in Canada and Greenland as soon as we have finished this in the US. And you can see this is just a simple way to try to itemize that drawing these pyramids, the standards that countries can use, they are just shared, common, global standards that are freely available, free of charge, and readily accessible. And in each country, you would have your own priorities on top of that. And we would argue that while we do not want to influence as industry how the regulations and the priorities are formed in each country, we would argue that it's important for regulations and laws not to jeopardize, not to limit each country's free use of the latest, best modern standards that can help its own industry to do this as safe, as sound as possible. This is the Barents 2020 project. Let me give you some reflections on how we are in this area in some of the Arctic nations today. I have included only the offshore states here, as you can see. I didn't include Arctic nations that do not have a continental area. And if we divide the regulatory approaches of countries today in a prescriptive approach or a performance-based approach, we could say that in the United States and in Russia, we would define the system today as more prescriptive, and we would define the system in Canada and Norway more performance-based. Greenland is also wants to have a performance-based system, but we also put this on a sort of a stability axis, and stability is just a function of time. So after a few years, we would have to put all countries that do not change the system into the stable area. But if we look United States after Macondo, they have been starting to ask themselves how they're doing this. So that's why we're putting this to a less stable regime right now. And Russia is also instituting new laws, and they are developing the offshore regulations. So I think it's also fair to say that this is also a regime that is being formed right now as we're speaking. And then what's really the difference between performance-based approaches and prescriptive? You can say that in all countries you would have laws that ask who are responsible and what do we want to accomplish. And in all countries we would have standards that say, how do we do this? How do we do that? The difference really between performance-based system and prescriptive-based system is that in some countries the regulations also detail how you're going to do things, while in other countries the regulations merely reiterate the legal expectations in some more detail and said, what do you want to accomplish? And if we take this further, we would say that a system where the regulations don't prescribe what we're going to do is a performance-based system, while a system where the regulations give detailed requirements for how you're going to do things would be a prescriptive approach. And in this system also, all standards would have almost equal force to the bottom, while in a performance-based system, the only legal requirements would stop at the regulations, and the standards would not have any legal force. The standards would be a mere means for the companies to meet the expectations, to meet the goals that the regulations have established. So if we put this into a system with the same variables, you can be stable prescriptive, stable goal-based, developing and prescriptive, and developing and goal-based. We would say that if we go way back to the 70s, we would think that the Soviet Union and the United States would be stable prescriptive regimes. And we would have the United Kingdom and Norway as developing, maturing prescriptive regimes because they were new oil and gas provinces as opposed to the Soviet Union and the United States. Then there is one accident in the North Sea, the Piper Alpha accident in 1986, where 167 people perished. And you have the Lord Cullen report that really starts to question and radically changes the approach to safety regulations in the UK. And Norway very much took this at heart. We saw another development. We saw the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. And these two events, and there might be more, of course, but at least these two events led to some changes in the system. First, you saw United Kingdom and Norway doing a 180-degree change to a goal-based, performance-based system. And you saw the Soviet Union, early 90s, not longer in existence. So you saw Russia and Kazakhstan as two examples of cold climate hydrocarbon countries that started to develop their own new regimes. Then you had the Macondo accident. And the interesting thing after the last few years is that what we see in Russia and Kazakhstan is these countries moving definitely in the direction of a more and more performance-based system, trusting more risk analysis and less focus on prescription. I don't say that this transfer is completed. I don't say it's not without challenges. I'm just saying that what we see in the market is that there has been a radical change in that direction. And we saw the United States, yes, going to questioning its own safety approaches and coming up with some new rules and regulations. But have we seen the United States doing the step change into a performance-based regime as we did in Norway and the UK after Piper Alpha? No, we have not. We have seen a lot of effort to improve the safety approaches, but if you look for signals about what approach the system is going to trust, it does not seem to be a system which do the radical change into a performance-based system. Is a performance-based system, is that something you can trust? Okay, I'm not in an oil company. I don't talk for my own industry. I just talk as an independent risk management company observing this from the side. If you go in and look into the statistics, and I'm sorry this report is only in the Norwegian language, but this is one of the latest reports from the Norwegian Petroleum Safety Authority, which would be the same as the HSE executive in the UK, Rostec-Nazor in Russia, BASI in the US. This shows how many personal injuries you have per million worked hours. And I just combined the figures for floating and production platforms, because in that way you pretty much get both the exploration activities and the production activities put into one model. And you can see that the safety performance in the North Sea in this aspect has shown a continuous and radical improvement. Other things from Norway that tried the performance-based system is that having less regulations and having regulations as goal-based, it really does not damage your safety performance. Actually, quite the contrary is the statistics that we have from Norway. I would also like to share just one lesson that we got from the Macondo accident, because a lot of the angst in the Arctic now has been augmented by the Macondo accident and the risk about drilling. And my company was asked by the Department Department of Interior in the U.S. to do the legal forensic investigation of the blowout preventer of the platform. And some of the lessons we have from that is that it's very, very difficult to be the guy out on the platform killing a well. A well can cost $50, $100 million. Who wants to be the guy who kills a well before you know it is a disaster and come back to the boardroom of your company and say, you know, I was the guy who killed a well. Yeah, you just cost us $100 million. It wasn't even an accident. But as an industry and as stewards, we need to be able to stop the activity, to kill the wells before we know that we have a disaster at hand. So that's why automatic activation of the blowout preventers, and also to have predefined safety-based activations, which doesn't then challenge the conscience of the guy there, but who really gives the guy on the rig the full support to do something at predefined level, are two issues that we see could be beneficial for the overall safety of the drilling in the north. So finally, just to conclude, yes, if we do rigorous risk management, and remember, risk management is not to guarantee that you always find the right solution. Rigorous risk management means to have enough data, enough understanding to know what activities are acceptable and you can go for them, and what activities are not acceptable and we will not go for them. If you have rigorous risk management, if you mobilize the best technologies that you have, if you mobilize the best methods that you have, if we help each other, then I'm quite certain that some of the fields in the Arctic will be safe to develop. Thank you very much.